Hello, welcome back to Anime on the Sea to Sky, episode 24. We are currently reaching the end of the spring 2021 season. Things are creeping closer and closer, with a handful of shows that I picked up near the end, including Odd Taxi, and a handful of ones that recently just ended with SSSS Dynazenon. But at this point in time, I'm thinking that I'll just wait for the next episode to go follow through, so for the next 2 weeks to pass, and have the rest of the shows finally reach their conclusion, and probably by the next episode, I'll be able to have more than enough to talk about to give a quick summary of what we had through this season and leading into the next one through the summer. But besides that, I guess there's a handful of things that we can talk about, mostly in the movie industry, but in terms of releases that are going to be putting out on Netflix, definitely one more in terms of notoriety, which is definitely the live-action Cowboy Bebop, which is going to be premiering this fall. It is announced that the live-action adaptation of Sunrise's Cowboy Bebop anime will premiere at that time, with Yoko Kanno composing the live-action series, and a handful of others in the previous production being able to take part in through consulting jobs as well, including previous director Shinichiro Watanabe. This is a co-production between Netflix and Tomorrow Studios, with Netflix handling the physical production, and Tomorrow Studios has a partnership between producer Marty, who has also worked on the live-action One Piece project, and ITV Studios, which is the one that is helming through Shinichiro Watanabe. So this is definitely going to be interesting. I am really keeping my expectations and hype low for this because there has not been a single decent live-action anime adaptation that has not necessarily called back to its original one. The only one that I can really think back to, but had no expectations and no discernible relation to its original source material, would have definitely been Tom Cruise's Edge of Tomorrow, which I'm pretty sure I've already talked about at length on this podcast before, but there was nothing relating that to its original source material. All you need is kill. So to be fair, there's not really much that I'm expecting out of this adaptation and what they're going to be able to accomplish. I'm literally having absolutely no positive outlook on this, so at least there's absolutely no way that I can be let down or put in a negative disposition, because until I'm proven wrong, or until all of us are proven wrong, at this point in time, all we can just say is that every live-action adaptation is doomed to fail. And although the majority of us really hope for that to be proven wrong, nothing has been able to give us any way to think otherwise. And moving on to at least the final episode of Wonder Egg Priority, it is going to be a special edition finale premiered to air on June 29th, and it is expected to be an hour long and will serve as the continuation as well as the overall story ending to this really odd but genuinely heartfelt original production led by Cloverworks. And it was one of those series that was a lot like Odd Taxi for me this season, where I heard rumblings about this show's surprise and leap in quality and absolute ridiculous growth in terms of as the series went along over the course of the season. And there's not really much else for me to say, is that I really, it's all of my sympathies go towards the production staff that have been trying to go through and get this project to completion, because it's been nothing but red herrings and nothing but just negative outlooks and really horrifying stories about the production staff trying to just get this thing out the door. It has already had an English dub produced by Funimation that started on March 31st, but at the end of the month, we'll finally be able to see what the conclusion of this series brings, and I can only hope that it sticks the landing, because it is definitely something that both it and the staff deserve. And I guess not necessarily relating to anime, but I guess I might as well touch on the fact that, E3 was over the past week or so, and even though there wasn't as many big announcements leading towards it, although in comparison, I would say the biggest one that I have absolutely no prior attachment to would definitely be an Elden Ring announcement, and I really hope that kind of just moves through, considering that I've heard nothing but positive praise to the fans of this series actually finally getting some piece of content from Software. It was really awkward to think about. It's like, from Software, but yeah, From Software and Miyazaki's team have definitely been really riding high on the majority of their productions and games that they've been able to create over the past couple of years, and I'm really hoping that they'll be able to recreate the magic and bring this to their fan base in more ways than one as well. And then, of course, there was also a Monster Hunter Stories 2 that's going to be going throughout a handful of stuff. Psychonauts 2 also getting an announcement, and Oh yeah, getting released this year, so definitely happy to see that pop out of it. But for me, considering that I'm definitely more of a Nintendo stan, I'm kind of just, I've got a Switch, and that's the only one that I'm necessarily going to be pointing towards, and kind of giving a little more preface and priority to. So at least for the ones that pop through, we have a new 2D Metroid that I definitely realized that Next Level Games was able to make not necessarily a remake, but just a different sort of 3D style one that came out on the 3DS, I think in 2016. But this is going to be the first new and unique 2D Metroid game in over 20 years. So I'm really curious to see what Metroid Dread does with it. They literally just showed another, staple in a handful of cutscenes from the new Breath of the Wild sequel, and that's honestly all they need to do, because it's like, okay, we know you guys are looking for the Breath of the Wild sequel. This is what you've got. These are the handful of mechanics that you're going to be working with. And hopefully we'll be able to get this out by the end of next year. And I would imagine that there are many, many people that are excited for it. And I know it's kind of blasphemy because the two biggest games on the Switch, Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, I still have not played. So maybe at some point in time I'll finally be able to get back to those. My uncle can finally get off my back to just finally put those under my belt and actually give those an opportunity to play. But I feel like I'm actually going to be looking more towards Mario Golf Super Rush, considering that I was a huge fan of Toadstool Tour, back on the Nintendo GameCube, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's going to be the one that I'm going to be giving more priority by the time it comes out by the end of next year. Unfortunately, no World Ends With You Neo announcements, which isn't really surprising because I know it's going to be coming out in July, so there's not really much else that they can say about it. All that they know is that, look, our anime adaptation of the previous series is going to be finishing up by the end of this month, and by the end of July, you guys are going to be getting your sequel game, and that's honestly all you need to look forward to, and that's all we need to say about that. So I guess that's kind of going to be leading forward to the next one, but the most positive surprise to me that came out of this, especially coming back with a game from one of my childhoods, would have been Advance Wars. Both the first and the second game are going to be bundled up together and repackaged and re-released as a reboot. In the case of Advance Wars Reboot Camp. And so that's definitely something that's going to be really interesting for me to jump back to and play once that ends up coming up by the end of the year. And I'm really excited to see how that's going to be bringing up, because I definitely knew that in terms of like other turn-based RPGs, kind of like Fire Emblem, I was a lot better at those, but I never remembered finishing Advance Wars 1. And I think I borrowed or rented the second game, but then, of course, with the limited time frame that I had, I wasn't able to complete that one either. So maybe I can finally go back and just give myself a second chance and kind of like re-experience it and actually complete the game for once. So now I guess moving forward with the topic at hand, but is going to be looking back with the other pieces of news that I've been going through over the past 2 weeks, almost all of them revolving around streaming and theater releases of films that are going to be coming out, like between the end of this year and next year. And so, hey, guess what? More Demon Slayer talk. It's going to be getting another re-release in theaters by the end of June, but then something that's a little more concrete, and probably, unfortunately, the only way that I'm going to be able to watch this legally is that it is going to be streaming exclusively on Funimation in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand on June 22nd. And so it's a Ufotable project. I was finally able to watch Heaven's Feel Part 3 after over a year of waiting, and even though it was only through a home theater system, it was still enjoyable to a degree, but it was definitely something that I was hoping, especially with the amount of polish and production that Ufotable is able to bring to almost all of their projects. Then I was really hoping that I would be able to catch Demon Slayer in theaters, but I don't think Canadian theaters are going to be opening up soon enough just to actually be able to give us the opportunity to do that. But at least for another opportunity to watch this, at least it'll be able to come out on Funimation, and that'll give me and everybody else the opportunity to actually be able to stream and watch this to those that haven't been able to do it. I mean, I would imagine Australia and New Zealand has already had a handful of theater experiences, and the US has definitely been able to go through that, but this is more just like great news for us up in Canada who haven't been able to go through and see any movies in theaters for over 6 months, so I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see, and I'm really hoping that it's at least an enjoyable ride to lead into the second season. That's probably going to be coming out next year. And in terms of G-Kids, so they've finally been able to set a release date for 2 of their films, one of which is José the Tiger and the Fish, which is going to be in the US and Canadian theaters July 12th to 14th. Maybe the theaters are open up at that point? I just really hope so. But there's not really it's just a really interesting, like, I think it's a novel adaptation. Yes, the original story from 85. But yeah, it's just a Bones film that's kind of just come out of nowhere, and I've heard nothing but positive reviews in people who have, of course, seen it in Japan and those who have already ripped it. But it's really interesting in terms of a university student and a young girl who has rarely gone out of her house herself due to her being unable to walk. And when the two meet, their grandmother is able to take them out for a morning walk and actually be able to build and improve their relationship, and just kind of seeing how that develops. So it's kind of, there's no reason for me to get kind of excited about this, but it just seems like it's going to be an interesting addition to move forward through. And it's kind of like, I have no expectations for it, but I will be pleasantly surprised if I'm able to enjoy the experience if I'm able to see it in theaters next year. And then we get a little bit more information on Mamoru Hosoda's new film, Belle, that will be premiering dubbed and subbed in North America, and it will be out this winter, considering that it's going to open in Japan on July 16th, so it definitely makes sense that for about a 6-month production and distribution gap between just worldwide audiences and the original premiere. So December or January is probably going to be the expectation that I'm going to think that this film is finally going to be able to get like its North American debut. And I don't know. I'm really curious. It's I think I already said before previously in one of my episodes in terms of like what I think about Mamoru Hosoda in the sense that he hasn't really surpassed any of his early works in terms of, you know, Summer Wars, in terms of The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, in terms of Ame and Yuki Wolf Children. Like, he hasn't made a great or exceptional film since the early 2010s, and so it really, the only things that I've heard about, considering that it's just kind of like, it seems that the virtual world that the new character is going to inhabit in this film definitely seems like he's going back to his roots in terms of Summer Wars, and I'm really curious to see how that's going to translate and how that's going to be relating not only to me, but to the rest of the audience in general. And then another movie that's probably not going to be coming out, well, definitely not going to be coming out until 2022, which is going to be the Jujutsu Kaisen Zero anime film. It's going to be released in Japan. So far, the date that it's got is December 24th, so we're definitely going to be able to have an opportunity to see that sometime around next summer. And I'm really curious to see how that moves forward and what they are, like, what MAPPA is going to have to do, because they are now tied down with Jujutsu Kaisen. They are going to be able to adapt this property for as long as it is running in Shonen Jump. So it's going to be concerning, because we already know how tight their production schedule is and how many projects they've been forced to, like, go through and work on. So I really don't know when the second season of Jujutsu Kaisen is going to come out. I'm going to tentatively say, like, summer or fall of next year. Yeah, at this point in time, we have no idea. We know that it is a phenomenon, and we know that the anime cranked up the manga sales over the past year, and it's definitely deserving of that because the adaptation is absolutely fantastic. I have not jumped into the manga yet, but I'm really curious to know when the second season is going to be coming out, but it's just that of the handful of chapters of the manga that I've read, in comparison to the motion and how dynamic and fun and entertaining the characters are with voiceover and with color and motion and a dynamicism in their cuts, I really feel like I'm going to stick to mostly an anime-only sort of deal, where I'm not going to go up and catch up to the manga, but it is a really good product that definitely deserves all the hype it's getting, and I'm really curious to see how the productions of the second season and the film are going to be moving into the next year. And then going into a final piece related to G-Kids is definitely going to be that, once again, they're going to be continuing their Ghibli Fest into the latter half of 2021, once the rest of the industry finally starts to open up, and they're going to be able to get 4 Ghibli films to screen this year: Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, Castle in the Sky, and My Neighbor Totoro. And of all of these, the one that I'm probably going to go through and watch, because it's one of the only ones that I haven't seen, is Castle in the Sky. And so I'm really curious to see how that's going to translate into a theater experience, but that's not going to be coming out until mid-November. So I'm really curious to see how that's going to go through. But honestly, this is definitely something that I would recommend everybody have the opportunity to go through, because this is now happening every year. And if there is any Ghibli film that you are extremely curious about to not only get a good theater experience out of, but to finally, like, knock those off, because there is, like, little to no bad Ghibli films. And if there's anyone that you are incredibly interested in, I can wholeheartedly recommend you to actually go and step out, and not step outside, but just step outside your comfort zone and try and at least give these movies an opportunity, because I can almost guarantee that you are not going to have a bad time with any one of these that you decide to experience. And so with all this talk about movies, I thought I would just kind of like move forward and just kind of look at what the moviescape has been like over the past couple of years, like especially leading through from my perspective out through the 2010s, especially related to the anime industry. And I know that I talked a bit about it in one of my earlier episodes, but it's just kind of something that I wanted to kind of elaborate on, just to kind of move forward and just kind of like tell you my experience and seeing the transition of all of these anime theatrical releases that have been definitely getting more and more popular, especially with the expanse of how popular anime has over the past about 10 to 15 years, and kind of seeing how that's translated to a different kind of movie experience, depending on what movie and what show that you decide to go into and watch. And so it was really interesting, considering that a lot of it did go through, and not in terms of chronological, I'll get to what I felt in the beginning. So I guess if there's any way to like describe what defines a different theater experience for me, it's definitely the energy and how the relationship between you and every other member of the audience outside of your immediate family or friends that decided to go and watch it with you, and how that kind of changes it. Because the first time I ever had that kind of experience inside of a movie theater would have definitely been the final Harry Potter film, The Deathly Hallows Part 2, which came out back in 2011. And what was it? I think it was a friend of my mother's who was taking her elementary school class to go see it on day one of its release. And so it must have been like a 3 or 5 o'clock screening in the afternoon, because it wasn't in the evening. But it was the first time I'd ever seen just the energy and fervor of an entire audience with just waiting and anticipating in such bated breath to finally like get in, because nobody could stand still. And not the entire audience or the entire group of people was definitely monotone, because you saw cloaks, you saw wands, you saw glasses, you saw tattoos of thunderbolts, you saw like witch hats and wizardry and everything that was related to and surrounding the hype of this being the final film in this saga, which was definitely something that I had continued to watch ever since like the early 2000s, ever since I was like 6 or 7. I don't remember going through, because I didn't go to see the first 2 Harry Potter films in theaters. The first one I remember to go see in theaters would have definitely been The Prisoner of Azkaban. And it was definitely a fun experience, but it was really cool to just kind of see like everybody in this theater was the same as me, we had all seen the first 2 films, and besides me, almost everybody else I would imagine would have read the books, because that was definitely one of the things that kind of like brought this thing to light. And that was definitely one of the reasons why a buddy of mine was incredibly pissed that she only had one extra ticket to bring, and I got to go see the final film on opening day, where since I realized that he was a much bigger fan than I was, he'd read the books, he'd seen all the films, he was like he was incredibly enamored with this series, but somehow I got the ticket. But it was a really unique experience, and it was so fun to be a part of that energy when every Death Eater got like vanquished and they were defeated in battle, and Harry was finally able to have his final confrontation with Voldemort, and just like having the roar of applause and cheers with everybody standing up and finally being able to accept and realize the fact that this was it, like that was it. It's over. That was the final piece of Harry Potter media that they were expecting that they were ever going to get. Because, of course, you had Mysterious Beasts, and J.K. Rowling also released a sequel book. I think it was The Cursed Child in relation to the Harry Potter series. But, like, it was such a unique occasion, and it was so defining in terms of, like, really trying to figure out, like, what I just experienced and why it was different, and it was really cool. And I didn't have that kind of experience followed up on until 2012 with the first Avengers film. And it was the same deal. With Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, you and everybody else in that theater had watched all 7 movies leading up to that one event and trying to see the conclusion of what everything had built up towards. And even though Avengers wasn't a conclusion, it was definitely the first time that anybody had ever really seen that kind of a dynamic group finally all come together and be this ensemble cast of force and a genuine team-up, considering that it was the same deal. You had to watch Iron Man 1, and I think 2 was in there before the first movie came out. You had Captain America, you had Incredible Hulk, and you had Thor, and everybody, I would imagine, almost everybody inside of that theater had the same energy and dedication that you did. Almost all of them had seen every single film, and you all had the same sort of energy and the same sort of knowledge and prerequisite to go in and to be able to enjoy this film as much as possible. And it was a riot. Just seeing everybody cheer and stand up when the team up was finally able to go through with the big battle in New York, watching everybody, or listening everybody laugh their ass off when Hulk just completely bodied Loki inside of the Avengers Tower, and finally getting up and meeting everybody else and standing all together once the day is won and victory has been achieved. It was a really fun and dynamic and really just universally wholesome experience to kind of just experience that with everybody. On top of the fact, I was able to get like a good group of like 10 other people inside of one of my high school classes to go in and join in this experience with me. It was really cool. And so over those next couple of years, the first times I would still be able to not really get that same energy, but to actually go through and see animated films, or in this case, anime films in theaters, would have definitely been related to, as I was talking to previous, which would have been the Ghibli Fest. And so with that, I mean, the Ghibli Fest was able to give me experiences for Spirited Away, My Neighbor Totoro, Nausicaa the Valley of the Wind, Whisper of the Heart, Howl's Moving Castle, The Secret of Arrietty, my personal favorite Ghibli film, Porco Rosso, and probably the next one, which, of course, I haven't seen yet, Castle in the Sky. And it was really interesting and new for me to actually have the opportunity, which even though, like, knowing myself, I already had Torrent's List at my disposal, I had already had the tools and opportunities to just go online and just watch these. But there were a handful of them that I hadn't, and I was really curious about why they were only able to get a handful, but that was definitely due to license and distribution hurdles that they would have to go through, and they weren't able to get all of them. But still, having the opportunity to go see all of these Ghibli films in theaters was definitely, like, more than enough. It paid more than enough for the price of admission to actually give me that kind of experience and to give me that sort of satisfaction to go through and finally tick these off my list, because none of these were a negative experience to actually be able to go through. And it's kind of the same deal, even though there wasn't any energy, everybody inside of the film was just waiting with bated breath and just going through and enjoying these films to the best of their ability. And so having those opportunities are definitely like a great way to not only get more people into the medium, but just give them the opportunity to go and have other people like myself try and just explain or bring people into like why these films are so special and why they're just such a pantheon of quality that every other director should definitely strive towards. And so at least around 2016, I was able to go through and follow through with a handful of independent theaters that were definitely able to help me have the opportunity to watch all of these films that were finally getting more than enough of an international audience, because I definitely think it really helped with the release of Your Name, because it was just such a worldwide phenomenon that the fact that we still had to wait over a year from the Japanese release to finally actually have the opportunity to see it in theaters was more than frustrating, but we were actually able to finally get that sort of experience to ourselves and finally realize that, oh yeah, no, people are realizing that there is an international market for this. There is a demographic that is definitely going to be willing to go out and watch these films, even if they're out for less than a week. Hell, even if they're out for less than 2 days. And so more and more independent theaters were definitely like going through a lot of the anime route. I mean, through a handful of these. I think the Rio Theater in Vancouver is definitely one that I should give praise to, because at least through them, I was able to go through and watch the original Ghost in the Shell film. I was able to watch Akira. I was able to watch Mind Game through Masaki Yuasa, and definitely a film that I wouldn't have had any sort of expectation leading into it, which was Tekkon Kinkreet, which is a really trippy film, really out there. I would still recommend it, because the quality is definitely there, but it is just such a unique experience to kind of like see that not only in a theater, but just to watch it in general. So it was definitely awkward. Not really awkward, I would say, but it was still more than enough a good experience to like garner me repeatedly going back and watching all these films. Because with that, in 2017, not only was I able to go back, but it was kind of where I started. 2017 was definitely the year where I started to realize that it's now happening. There's more and more consistent releases and more opportunities for films that don't have prior work to go off of to actually be able to succeed and get people to go to. Because, like, even then, in the 2000s, I saw, like, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon films in the theaters, but of course those were in general. Everybody knew what those were, and it was incredibly easy to get that demographic to go see it in the theater. And then, even though in 2017 you had films like the first My Hero Academia film, which, in relation to both Harry Potter and Avengers, that was a film experience, or that was a theater energy that I had not felt in over 5 years, and just being able to experience that with everybody, with the new sort of prerequisite that this was like, you had to go through and like watch, I think it was 3 seasons, it was either 2 or 3 seasons at the time, and you knew that everybody around you was a weeb. Like, of course you would kind of have those same sorts of deals where there aren't that many people that would go to, like, any of the Ghibli Fest films and watch those, but, like, those are just universal to everybody. Like, same deal with Harry Potter, same deal with Avengers. It was kind of like this universal sort of appeal that anybody could go through and get into, even though there was a prerequisite to go through and enjoy it to the most, or even understand it. But then now, once 2017 had hit, this was where you were going to films with fellow weebs. Like, this was a demographic and a group that was all sharing in the same passion, that was all there for the same reason that you were. And even though it was definitely a niche sort of product, that was able to bring all of you closer together and make for a more entertaining and unique experience. I can definitely understand, and that's kind of one of the only like asterisks to this. Whenever it's a shonen, like whenever it's Dragon Ball Z, whenever it's Naruto, or not Naruto, whenever it's My Hero Academia, whenever it's going to be Jujutsu Kaisen, these shonen films and adaptations are definitely going to garner a much more energetic and livelier crowd, and I would really hope that you would definitely, like, understand and look into that going into it, because I can definitely see a lot of people, and there have been vocals that have just not really enjoyed it because it was like, oh my god, every time somebody came on screen, like a new character that you've seen in every episode came on screen, everybody's like screamed, and then and a joke was there, and everybody laughed because even though it wasn't funny, it was still a joke. And then when there was a really cool cut of action animation, everybody like shouted and screamed, like all got their fists up, and just their hype was the hype that would break the heavens. And I can definitely understand that can be annoying and obnoxious, and it's totally understandable. But for shonen films in particular, I will definitely just put that just asterisk and that like a warning on there, because it's definitely going to be a different kind of energy, especially when it's opening day, because you know that there are going to be more than enough people that are going to try and get those tickets and have that same kind of energy. But personally, I really enjoy those theater experiences, especially when you have stuff like Dragon Ball, definitely when you have stuff like My Hero Academia. All of it is more than enough to go through and garner praise, to actually have these films have that kind of staying power and that kind of drive to get these people to the theater, and I can definitely enjoy those. But then in terms of like much lesser known films, like in 2017, you definitely had those opportunities to go and see those, because you had, even though it's from the Monogatari series, the Kizu Monogatari films were definitely a trip and definitely were for everybody, and it was definitely a niche within a niche, even when it comes to anime fans. And the third Kizu Monogatari film was definitely a trip, because it was awkward at times, like watching a handful of those scenes when you were in a theater with several other people where you all knew what you were getting into, but you didn't realize it was going to be like this ridiculous. But then you had, of course, one of the Masaaki Yuasa films that I went to go see, Lu Over the Wall. Like, that wouldn't have been able to find, like, a decent crowd outside of independent theaters, like, a couple of years ago. Like, I was incredibly enjoyed and, like, overwhelmed and thrilled to, like, be able to actually be able to enjoy those inside of a theater setting. And then the same deal, Maquia, because it was Mario Okada, because it had more than enough of like a studio and a backing and more than enough popularity to go through. It was sold out, but people were still able to understand that this was a drama. This was something that was going to be well experienced silent and reacted only in either gasps or tears. And everybody understood that. And so that is definitely one of those anime theater experiences where everybody is much more reserved because everybody wants to like sit back and absorb and enjoy this film in a much more regular energy, in a much more regular setting. So after that, I ended up going through how many? I went through 5 theater experiences in 2018, like leading up to that. So you still had the same shonen stuff. You had Broly, which was an incredibly energetic and ridiculous spectacle of animation and fights. You also had Makoto Shinkai's like follow-up film, Weathering with You, which was mixed, and I can definitely agree that it was like on that set. I still think it's an averaging film and don't think it deserves as much praise as his other films get, but I don't know, what can you do? In sequel series, you had the first Konosuba film go out, and that was a trip. That was debauchery, and that was straight ridiculousness, all condensed into one theater experiences. Nobody could keep silent, whether it was laughing, whether it was jokes, whether it was hype, whether it was just everything under the sun. I really hope that no other fan decided to bring their parents, because I'm pretty sure I saw a couple of older faces come into the crowd when we were all taking our seats, and I'm thinking, oh no, you fool. You should not have done that. This is really not going to be going in your favor. Like, it's going to be so raunchy, and you're going to be the only one enjoying it, but you might not even be able to enjoy it when you realize it's like, oh, well, you had the androgynous, or not androgynous, you had the the incredibly bodacious Chimera. You had all of the like parents trying to push Megumin onto Kazuma's like rich fortune, just literally his fortune, and then just kind of the overall ridiculousness of the entirety of it. So I don't know. I'm really hoping that you're able to like enjoy that and just have a good time despite the circumstances, because that was kind of ridiculous. But then you would still have like lesser known animated works that still had more than enough of a following. And then, like, in terms of the sequel films, because, I mean, there was Liz and the Bluebird, as well as the third, well, I guess, not really the third, the first sequel Sound Euphonium film, which was the third in the series, but the first 2 were definitely compilation films, so you didn't really have to go back and watch those, which I didn't. And I would say the only reason the Sound Euphonium film was like a negative experience for me was that it was advertised as they subbed the Japanese dubbed version, but they gave us the English dub. And so going through, I really enjoyed Sound Euphonium, and honestly, the film was great as well. But going from the Japanese audio to the English audio, just as a whiplash out of nowhere, was definitely it took a lot of getting used to, for sure. Movie was fine, but that definitely kind of like botched the experience a bit for me, so there's not really much that I could do. And then kind of the same deal with something unique like Kizumonogatari or Live Over the Wall. Penguin Highway also came out in 2018, and it was definitely an enjoyable experience. Like, nobody had any sort of expectation leading into it, and not even I could explain what happened at the end, but overall, the experience was definitely more than enough enjoyable to actually, like, go through and experience with everybody else. I think I watched this one, like, in downtown Vancouver in a Cineplex. Yeah, it was the International Village. And I don't know, I had a great time. I really enjoyed the film. And I don't know how, like, I'm really surprised that I was only able to go through 3 theater experiences over the course of 2019, but they were definitely not lacking in any other, not lacking in any sense of the guard. I definitely have lacking memories of what these films were. I think I wasn't in town, or I wasn't near a theater when the second My Hero Academia film finally premiered, and then by the time I got there, I was one of like 10 to 20 people that were in the theater, and I just wanted to get it off my list, and I wanted to like make sure I had gone to go and see it in a theater, but the energy was definitely different, and it was definitely not something that I would recommend. Like, if you don't have that same sort of energy going along with a My Hero Academia film, which is definitely going to be interesting, because I can't remember if the third My Hero film is coming out by the end of this year or at the beginning of next year, but you need that energy, because it definitely adds to the experience. And even though I could still say the film was average, like, it definitely would have been uplifted by having like many more people by your side trying to at least share the experience with you. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I gave it like a 5 or a 6 regardless, because the movie in of itself was just kind of like, I understand that more shonen films are not canon to the story for the most part, and it's definitely like to get people in seats, and it's more of a product to just to try and like add on to the success of the previous series. But man, that it really like hit home with that film. Like there was nothing like relatively positive that I could say about it, like besides the Nakamura cut that happens in the final fight. And then I got to go see Ride Your Wave. I rewatched it recently. It was a good film. It's just that I think I remember everything besides that film going through because I got caught in traffic. Like there was like 2 different accidents on the road. I finally ended up getting to go in and watch the film, but I was 20 minutes late. I finished it. I thought it was good. I enjoyed the experience at the time. I walk out of the theater door. I turn on my car. The ignition doesn't start. My battery is dead. And I'm just kind of like, wow, what the fuck? Thankfully I already had jump cables in my car and I was able to get like 2 bystanders because the theater was like right next to a bowling alley too. And so I was checking like, look, dude, please, I just need to borrow your car's battery for a minute. And so at least I was able to go through there, and I had like a subpar dinner at a Subway, and then I just took the drive home. And man, I was not feeling it. Like that, all the events surrounding that day definitely didn't kind of give me the best experience. But I still thought that Ride Your Wave was good. The much better experience that I had leading into this would have definitely been the Promare film. And I've seen it twice now in theaters, once for the Japanese audio and once for the English audio, because I really enjoyed having the crowd and the energy watching go see the Japanese one first, but then realizing like how dynamic and ridiculous, but really how high in overall quality like the film looked. I decided to go rewatch it again, but this time in English, so I could definitely process and absorb more of the backgrounds and the animation previously, and the dub was really good. Like, even having all the natural voices that came to me first come through in the Japanese, the English dub, and Johnny Young Bosch did a damn good job, like, getting this adaptation through. And it's like, even though it's definitely, like, better experience when you have a little bit of Trigger's catalog, like, gone through and absorbed inside of your, database brain, I don't know what to call it, but even like giving this as just a straight action romp to anybody that's interested in getting to the medium, I would definitely recommend that, and I would definitely give that more than enough of a chance for anybody else like looking to find like a really cool and bombastic animated action romp. And then leading into last year in 2020, of course, with COVID, all theaters are down. One of the experience I had, I was able to get one theater experience through, which would have been in November of last year, which was, I think, one of the last pieces before all of the theaters got shut down, because I was able to get in to the Lupin the Third film, and that was also incredibly enjoyable, and that was the last animated film that I've seen in theaters, which is really tragic, but it was still more than enough of an entertainable experience nonetheless. But it was really interesting to see the shift in streaming releases for animated films. Because, of course, at least for us in Canada, we got Heaven's Feel 3, we're about to get the Demon Slayer film, but then what we were able to do for the Made in Abyss sequel film is that you still had to pay the $20 fee like you would on like an Apple TV or an Amazon Prime, but it was $20 for a 48-hour viewing, and you could still watch it as many times as you want, but it was a better theater experience because if you were which is awkward because you weren't able to share this with anybody because it was COVID and you were all under quarantine. But like for an experience like that, if you were able to get like at least one more person in, like the $20 was nothing. And so that was a really, really good film to like push through. It was definitely more Made in Abyss. It was incredibly graphic and incredibly depressing. But even though that's the case, I cannot wait I'm pretty sure, Made in Abyss has already been announced for a sequel, so I really cannot wait to keep pushing that forward and leading through. So, now we reach today, and at least for the past couple of months, the States has been opening up theaters, even though you're still able to, like the films that I went to go see in September and November, you still have to wear a mask for the entire duration of the film, which is totally fine. You can get over it. It's definitely, it does suck that you can't go in and buy the overpriced popcorn and all of the overpriced food sets, but still, I guess it is a little bit of a downturn. I would still recommend to go through and try and have the experience and get the opportunity to go see all these films that are all going to be coming out, like, relatively soon. Like, I already told you that Jose is going to be coming out in July. The Demon Slayer film is going to be having a re-release at near the end of the month. The Shirobako film is going to be released in theaters on August 10th. And then, at least by the end of this year, we should have the next Violet Evergarden film that has already been, like, released in Japan. And then, what is it? Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0 has already had its release this year in Japan. I think it was last month. So we might even get the final Evangelion film by the end of this year. There are going to be so many opportunities to actually go through and, once the majority of the population is vaccinated, re-experience this kind of theater setting. And I am incredibly excited to go back to the movies, because even though it was incredibly convenient over this quarantine to actually have everything at my disposal, used through torrents, used through streaming services, used through actually being able to, like, go through and pay stuff like GKids, pay guys like Fathom Events, just to give us the opportunity to pay them to watch these films, because the experience is worth it. And I know I've used the word experience so many damn times over the course of this episode, but it is worth it. And I could only imagine that by the end of this, and once the majority of it is over, and that we all have the opportunity to go back and re-experience all of these films in theaters, it's going to be a hell of a time to finally get that opportunity to go back and give us the chance to experience this with just other people. Like, go with your friends, go with your family if you somehow have them interested in the shows and the movies that you want to watch. It is going to be fun. At the very least, it is going to be fun. But yeah, this has definitely been an interesting sort of change in pace, because the majority of the times that I decide to record these are along the second weekends, like, leading up to it, so I can get the recording and the editing done before Sunday or Monday, and get these released out on the Monday or Tuesday, which has more been Tuesday rather than Monday as of late. But it's just been, I've been, like, checking in and kind of, like, passing back and forth the idea between myself about trying to, like, record a lot of these, like, much more in time, because the only reason that I feel like I ever try and get these out or, like, have a specific recording date is to just kind of have the news line up and have something at least more than enough to talk about like, for something to at least give me an idea, something that'll be able to push the topics forward and give me something to talk about for around 40 minutes to at least give me an episode. And so normally a lot of those inspirations come from the news articles, besides on the handful of ideas that are going to be coming out. I mean, next week is definitely going to be a spring 2021 retrospective, and I wouldn't be surprised if the episode after that is going to be the summer 2021. So at least that gives me the opportunity to have something lined up for the next month in terms of topics and shows to talk about. But the only thing that I'm probably going to be, like, bouncing back and forth just to check is, especially with something that happened to me today, is that I had the inspiration and I had the topic and I really had something that I wanted to talk about, and just so it doesn't force me into something like a crunch time where it's like Sunday or Monday and I haven't got an episode recorded and I don't really know what to talk about, and it really comes off as a half-assed sort of project, an episode that I don't really want to share with the world, and I don't really want for it to actually be released and waste all of your time. So, maybe. At least this definitely felt a lot more natural, and it definitely felt like a lot less constrained in order for me to try and get this recording through and get this episode out the door, but time will tell. I'm still working it out, still getting the kinks, and ironing out the majority of the creases that I can try and move forward with this podcast and just keep it going for as long running as possible, and to still hopefully keep it enjoyable as it is, much as it is for me, as it is for you. Well, thanks for the rambles, thanks for stopping by, and cheers.